creo, esta frase que quizá hemos oído antes, queremos seguir siendo lo que somos, pero no podemos seguir estando donde estamos, ni podemos seguir estando como estamos. Y esto supone tener una manera distinta, un paradigma distinto de trabajo. Bueno, solo quiero, además de agradecerles y darles la bienvenida acá, agradecer a quienes han organizado este espacio y coorganizado también el de ayer, un poco lo de mañana, lo de la semana pasada en Querétaro, evidentemente al Presence Institute, de donde es fundador y director Otto Scharmer, al Monte de Piedad, a Fundación FEMSA, a la Vaca Independiente, al CIESC, a Fortevalúa, a ICO, a Wasson Network, a PCM y a Cemefi, también a Coplataforma. Y darles las gracias a quienes trabajaron, a Laura Pastorini, a Willy Azar, Sandra Ortiz, a Marilú Villalón, a Ana Paula Ricalde, a Mariana Ríos. Pónganse de pie, ya empezó Laura Pastorini, ya empezó. Dani Dorantes, acá está, Gaby de la Torre, Natalia López, Dante Serna y muchos más. Bueno, muchas gracias al equipo, muchas gracias a todas y todos por estar acá. Le damos la palabra a Ana Paula.
Gracias, Ricardo, y de verdad gracias a todos, porque sin este equipo maravilloso, nada de lo del día de hoy, de lo de mañana, de lo de ayer hubiera sido posible. Pues bienvenidas, y antes de empezar quisiera invitarnos a ver quiénes estamos hoy aquí. Y voy a preguntar, ¿quién es del sector privado? Que alcen la mano, ¿quién viene hoy del sector privado? Muy bien. ¿Quién viene de la sociedad civil? Hay un grupo mayoritario. ¿Quién viene de gobierno? Hay una voz que tal vez todavía no llega y nos falta. Activistas, gente que trabaja tal vez de manera por sus causas sociales y agentes de cambio. Aquí hay unos cuantos. Muy bien, podemos tener varios sombreros, ¿cierto? Porque no somos una única persona y nos importan muchas cosas. Pues estamos muy emocionadas, les decía. Tenemos más o menos una proyección de que 200 personas van a participar el día de hoy. Y quienes no logren estar aquí en este primer piso, en esta planta baja, van a estar allá arriba. Y eso significa que también vamos a tener un momento de interacción entre diferentes niveles, vamos a convivir juntos, y eso tendrá algunos retos logísticos, tecnológicos. Les pido y les agradezco paciencia, comprensión, cooperación, porque es algo súper grande que no pensamos que fuera a ser así de grande. Pues el ser tantas personas, el ser un grupo diverso, también nos da una oportunidad de escucharnos y de conectar entre otros que no son con los que usualmente platicamos, con los que colaboramos. Y esta es una invitación hacia aprovechar esa oportunidad de que tratemos de tener conversaciones y participar en las dinámicas con aquellos que son caras nuevas. Caras nuevas es una oportunidad de escuchar nuevos paradigmas y de tal vez hacer nuevos amigos. Y eso también lo quiero traer porque es una forma en la que podemos tomar los retos que este mundo con la complejidad en la que estamos nos invita a tener. Entonces vayamos con esa curiosidad de escuchar otros paradigmas y de conocer a otras personas. Sin más, me da muchísimo gusto darle la bienvenida hoy a Otto, pero antes… ustedes aquí enfrente ven que está un lienzo en blanco, y ese lienzo en blanco hoy va a terminar todo menos en blanco. Tenemos a Riley Dow, quien va a facilitar de manera gráfica lo que hoy estemos conversando, lo que estemos escuchando, y les invito también que una vez que termine la jornada se den una vuelta para ver cómo se ve eso que hablamos, eso que conversamos, y es en lo que participaremos el día de hoy. Muchas gracias y bienvenidas, bienvenidos, bienvenides. Otto, es un gusto tenerte y muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Thank you. Buenos días. I'm sorry for my poor language skills addressing you in English. Ana Paula, Ricardo, dear fabulous organizing team, thank you so much for creating this event for all of us. I think what a little bit the headline, what we are trying to do here is to meet the moment we are in. Meeting the moment is the three-word summary of presencing. Meeting the moment. So to be more precise, presencing is to meet the future in the moment. To meet the moment in a deeper way that is not only connecting with the surface, but that is also connecting with what's dormant, what's possible. What it is that's possible, but in order to manifest, stays in need of us. So what really, you know, I just had a next door, a podcast, and the question that was asked of me was, okay, so tell us about your early life. How did all that? What's the backstory of this? How did theory U, presencing, and all of that come into being in the first place? And what I realized in that conversation is, it all was seeded already early on in my experience as a civil society activist. Because anyone who is, you know, active anywhere, like all of us here in the room, what is it that actually makes you do anything, right? For no obvious benefit for yourself. So what is it what is getting you on the streets? What is it that's getting you initiating things? It's the feeling, the sensing of a possibility of something, right? That's possible, but it's not going to happen without you. It's not so you feel it's a possibility, and in a way, kind of, it's a possibility that looks at you because it depends on you to manifest, to come into reality. So it's not, I think that's also the definition of the future, right? Usually when people talk about the future, you talk about scenarios 20, 30, 50, 100 years out and so on. It's stuff that happens in other places at a different time, perhaps other people. That's not how we as civil society people, and that's not when I studied entrepreneurs and innovators in science and, you know, across all different sectors. That's not how innovators experience the future. What I learned kind of really throughout my life, both my own activism, but also studying innovators, people who in their own field brought something new into reality, is something very simple, and it's this: the future is utmost personal. Because the future is something that looks at you, because it depends on you to manifest, to come into reality. And I think that's what brings us together here. It's that feeling. And that feeling is particularly significant in moments that are difficult, like the current one. That's when it really matters. So we live in a time where, I don't know really about Mexico, so you be the judge on that. But I would say, and I have a pretty good sense for that, worldwide, we probably have seen 10 years of, not only backsliding of democracy, but 10 years of civil society organizations under attack. So the rise of the backsliding of democracy, the rise of autocracy and populism, and the attack of civil society organization. It's really kind of, and you can witness, just look up north, right? What do you see? 4 institutions under attack. Media, universities, the courts, and civil society organizations. In other words, everything that's independent, right? Where independent sense-making and thinking is happening. And so, what is a modern society when you look at evolution? What is a modern society built on? Well, differentiation, right? You have kind of a multiple centers. You have checks and balances, whatever you call it, right? So it's kind of different sectors, not a monosector. It's not a theocracy. It's like different sectors and different centers, and so that's how we have been evolving, right? That's how we have been moving forward. That's how evolution has moved forward. So now that's so whatever is independent, right? That's so it's a pretty easy prediction, right? And so that gives you a sense of what's happening. That's unfolding up north, but it's not limited there. And okay, so that's exactly when it matters. And I grew up in Germany. I was born in West Germany. I was an activist in the environmental movement in the late 70s, for the anti-nuke movement, right, for regenerative energy, which led the foundation of the Green Party, which led, when they were in government, a legislation that was that has been copied in I think more than 70 countries, basically the energy feed-in tariffs, which helped to kickstart an entire industry of regenerative energy companies, right, and startups. So it took a generation, right? It doesn't happen overnight, and we are still halfway there only. But you can also see kind of how that. Another experience I had, like a social civil society experience, is in the peace movement in the early 1980s, which was kind of, was nothing special to participate in that. Pretty much everyone in my generation was engaged, just like in the Green movement back then. So. And I remember, so I was active both in West Germany, but also in East Germany and East Berlin, because some of my friends in West Berlin were exiles, were exiled from, because they were peace movement activists in East Germany. So all of these people then ended up in West Berlin. And so I had the passport to go over, right? So I then, got connected with both of these networks. At some point, I was came on a blacklist, so I no longer could enter East Germany. But a few months before the wall came down, I was leading an international students group together with Johan Galtung, the founder of Peace Research, who I had met at one of the universities there. And it was interesting. We talked to the grassroots activists, the civil society people. We talked to kind of the formal leaders of the institutions. No one saw this coming, except Johan Galtung, the peace researcher, he predicted that by the end of that year, the Berlin Wall is down, right? No one believed in that. Even not the very people in the front line of the civil society movement that were about to just making that happen. So that, and I mean, I remember kind of passing this Berlin Wall, kind of that was dividing the country and Europe, and so many times, right? That looked so big, so gigantic, right? And I knew this thing, well, how long will it take until this thing comes down, right? Well, I mean, it's, you know, I don't know, is it a generation, is it a century, is it more? No one knew, right? No one would have thought by the end of the decade it's gone. So it's also, but in hindsight, I would say I saw the symptoms of the crumbling, right? Where this stuff is no longer really working, right? And just in the same way I see right now, we see what's crumbling, right? We see kind of cracks are opening up where the old system is actually, in a way, in many ways, kind of in a beginning stage of a collapse. And so there's, yes, it looks as if nothing is changing, or if it changes, it's moving in the wrong direction. But history is never this kind of, it's a dialectical process, right? And so we should never underestimate the impact we have in our grassroots activism. And back then in East Berlin, you know, the whole stuff happens. I remember kind of you sitting in small groups in private flats and kind of people read their poems. And so that's really where art was relevant because it was risky. It was existential. And you had kind of these places that were really cultivating these connections, these relationships. And what really, the only thing I try to do right now is to democratize access to these places. And of course, what's getting into the way is, you know, all the devices and, you know, all the rest of it. But, you know, I think there has never been a movement that changed history, of which we have seen many. There's never been a movement that changed history without a supporting infrastructure. What is that? It's places where you come together. It's kind of where you talk, right? That's true for Rosa Parks, right? So that's really how development works. That's also how you move the country forward. So when you look at all the rankings, so health outcomes, educational outcomes, government efficiency, and so on, it's boring, right, to look at these rankings because every year it's the same thing. The top 8 countries, right, 5 of them are the Nordic countries, right? It's totally boring, right? They're always there, but that was not always the case. So if you double click on that and say, how did that happen, right? So why is it this boring to look at all these statistics? Well, the other, of course, area that comes in is East Asia, right? Kind of the Confucianist countries. But so why is that, right? And in the case of Northern Europe, it is the folk high school, which was, okay, I get like, what the heck is that? So from your faces, the folk high school is holistic learning, right? Whole person learning. It's something that we would call kind of, you know, adult development today, right? Kind of basically that is working on the level of head, heart, and hand, right? And that doesn't have an exam and stuff like that, where you really live together for half a year. And they took all these ideas that today's adult development, which back then was articulated by a small university in Germany, Weimar, where they put all the crazy people kind of who had these ideas, right? But then came some people from Denmark, right? In Germany, of course, it just stays as talk. You just only offer the good stuff for the elites, right? No, the Danish people took these ideas, Grundtvig, right, is his name, and they made it available to the farmers, to everyone, to the people on the ground. And they basically built these infrastructures. And you can see how, right, not the next year, but they built that out, and then the whole thing, a decade later or so, economic development takes off, right? So it's offering high-quality processes of whole person learning here, but also the heart, also the identity, and living together. Now, in the late 1920s, I think, they got a visitor. So they wrote it out, and then they replicated that across the Nordic countries. And you can see how kind of then a decade later, the economic development takes off. Then, so late 1920s, they had some visitor from the US, and they created, one of the major schools. And then they adapted that to US conditions, which became then one of the supporting infrastructures for Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, and other civil rights leaders kind of that moved things forward then in the United States, as we know. So none of these things happens, right? There was nonviolence training, there was kind of, so all of that was, so none of these things that really change history, like Rosa Parks, happened without this preparation. And intentional spaces where you build capacity and allow human connection to happen, right? To the land, to each other, and to our deeper sense of purpose, why we are here. And that's really what we need to do. I mean, that's kind of what of course, to some degree, we already are doing. But I think in the face of what's happening right now, what my sense is, we really need to democratize the access to these kinds of places, because the situation that we are in will not be solved by any single group. It will need all of us. So that's a little bit the backdrop. If I were courageous, I would stop here. Of course, I'm not, right? But that's, in a way, the gist of it, right? So it's, and of course, so maybe we can switch off this. These ones, can we switch off these lights? So it's, I'm afraid, kind of no one. But perhaps before moving into the rest of the day, is that okay? So before daylight, before we move into the rest of the day, I want to share a little bit of the underlying framework, because I forgot to mention one thing. So my father passed away last year, and only in the last year, when I had a number of longer conversations with him, I learned from him one of his formative experiences. Now, the first one was because he changed the way he was running the farm as a very young person from conventional to regenerative. And so he had two formative experiences. One was that the school where he had learned agriculture and so on, they were running experiments, right? And then in a certain area of the farm, and then the next morning, or a little while later, the next morning, 5 cows were dead, exactly in that area. And that kind of, so he saw it with his own eyes, and he knew there's something wrong, right? So there's something wrong in the way we do agriculture, right? That the entire paradigm. So he became interested in other things. Somebody gave him a book, and kind of, so that was kind of this regenerative or biodynamic. It was a framework that really resonated with him. So that was one formative experience. So in other words, you need an experience, but also you need a framework, right? Kind of, and that kind of the clarity that this simply makes sense allowed him later really to have the stamina to deal with all the setbacks. Of course, nothing works if no one knew how to do it back then, right? So many crop failures and stuff. But the other experience was he went to the folk high school. I had no idea. Because I told him about this thing, and he said, yeah, I went to one. What? And and he got a major intuition for him. So what was significant there? It was sitting with the faculty at the same table, right? Studying together, living together. And in that moment, he knew everything he experienced at home was wrong. Because on the farm, you had the owner family, one table, and the workers, the other table. He always preferred to hang out with the other table, but sometimes kind of he was summoned back. So he had that kind of ambivalent experience already as a young person. But seeing that, so that was his kind of experiencing that, not just seeing that, but experiencing the human-to-human conversation between faculty and students, right? It's basically kind of same level, the horizontality of that, right? And the dialogic nature of that. That was what gave him, what allowed him to see that everything he experienced at the farm could be done very differently, right? And that's what he did, right? When he took over, that was the first thing he did. So, anyway, that's just kind of a footnote to the other story. But it's really, because in a way, what's the problem today? It's not that we know too little, right? It's not, I mean, we know what's broken. We know what the solutions are in most cases, but we're not implementing them. It's the collective knowing-doing gap that is really something we need to address. And you cannot solve the collective knowing-doing gap with more knowledge. That's not a good strategy. So what is the collective knowing-doing gap? It's basically, the knowing is the head, right? The doing is the hand. And if these two things on a systems level are decoupled, how do you bring them together? And the answer, of course, is through the heart. You can't bridge that gap without connecting to the heart. And that's the movement-making challenge we have. Because we know what needs to happen. We need a planetary movement for all these things. And that movement, in many ways, is already in the making. It's already underway. But it needs an uplift. It needs a support, right? It's also not all things are great that are coming out of that movement, right? So it needs refinement. It needs intentionality. It needs exactly the thing that Rosa Parks was equipped with, right? To take that transformative action. And so that's one. And then So, and it needs embodiment, right? So we need to reach the heart, we need to embody, right? We need to feel it. And that's kind of what he did, right, when he was living there for half a year at this school, the folk high school. So in a way, the Presencing Institute and kind of all the different communities across the planet, the guiding idea for me is something very simple. It is kind of democratizing access to these kind of places and creating these enabling infrastructures, right, in many different forms, right? But they need to be intentional. They need to be connected. They need to have a method, right? If you don't have a method, right, you're just a random thing that is just reacting against stuff that's is being thrown at you, right? Kind of so it's kind of these, we need kind of these, and to some degree that's already there, but to some degree it needs kind of strengthening. So systems thinking, right? It needs obviously also kind of sense-making frameworks so we can communicate, we can apply research, and because research at the end of the day is the way kind of we can bring it to real scale and understand what we are doing. So and that's really what got me to MIT, right? Because I started out with a thesis, basically the reflective or reflexive modernization of capitalism. So the transformation of capitalism as a revolution from within, right? A thick book, no one ever read it. And what I realized is this is just more hot air, right? I was talking, right, about all these things that should happen and so on. But was I really useful for any of these things? Right? Or was I just kind of putting labels on stuff, right? And so the answer was sobering, let's put it that way. And since I had this kind of activism background myself, right? That's what brought me into it. So I studied economics and management because that's the heart of society. Right? If you want to transform society and you don't transform the economy, well, probably you missed an important piece. And so that's what got me immersed in that. And of course, then realizing that is somewhat sobering. And that brought me to MIT, right? To the systems thinking group and the organizational learning group. Because what inspired me there is learning by doing. Running experiments, working with organizations, and so on and so forth, and really kind of explore these what we learn and kind of integrate them and move them forward. So that's basically put me on this track. So looking at current reality from a systems view, we all know, we collectively create results that no one wants. So what is it called last Tuesday? Not Freedom Day, Liberty Day or Independence Day, right? Oh, Liberty Day. Okay, so since Liberty Day was declared, when was it, last Tuesday? Last Wednesday. So we are a week into Liberty now. In the US alone, I think, we have lost $10 trillion of equity, right? So that has just been evaporating. Now, you can ask, so who is this helping really, right? So it's not the people who voted for Trump. It's not the people who funded him. So there's, it's, a lot of, so it's basically, so we collect, so yet, that's what we have put into place, all right? So that's, Basically, the program that's enacted now is didn't come without announcement, right? So you want an example here? We collectively, we all already know kind of where this is ending, right? It's not going to end well. And in China, he has a nickname, right? You know what that nickname is? Make China great again. Because, of course, right, so that what happened in the first round, right? It forces you to generate capacity yourself domestically that you didn't have before, right? But that's a side thing. So the main part is so we collectively enact stuff that's hurting not only a few but many. And in this case, particularly the most vulnerable. So that's, of course, what we call, and you have heard that many times, kind of the poly-crisis, all the environmental issues, all the social issues, inequity, polarization, societies falling apart. But this is kind of the more inner side of it, the pandemic of mental health. I don't want to dwell there because that's just background. But I want to say one thing to the inner dimension here, which is the sense of perhaps the collective depression that you can feel in many places these days. And it's a feeling that says, you know what, this is kind of so messed up, right? All these other things here. It's perhaps already too late. And whatever I do or not do does not change at all where this thing is going. So that's what I call illusion of insignificance. And why is that an illusion? Because 69% of people worldwide today say they would sacrifice part of their personal income to combat climate change. Sacrifice, right? You know, contribute that. 69%. Yet, almost the same number of people also say, but I don't know how, right? So it's like, whatever, I have no agency in my own context. So my voice doesn't count at all for the collective decision-making in my community, and in my context, and in my country. So that's, in a way, the challenge. There's an abundance of positive personal intention across the entire planet. It's everywhere. And yet, we are unable to catalyze this abundance of positive personal intention into collective action and agency. That's the challenge. That's where I fail as educator. That's where we fail as change makers. And certainly that's where we fail as institutional leaders. So I want to really, because if we don't fix this one, we know on these things what the problems are and what the solutions are. That's not a mystery, right? But it's a knowing-doing gap is the problem. And that has to do, so I would say this is in a way a little primary, right? If we are not addressing that, so where do we see that in civil society movement? In burnouts and all sorts of things, right? So it's like we need to really shift how we approach this. So this is a sentence that I like because it's addressing exactly this issue. When a system is far from equilibrium, small islets of coherence in an ocean of chaos have the capacity to uplift the entire system to a higher order. And what that is, it's kind of a more poetic articulation of the principle of bifurcation points, right? When a nonlinear system is moving from one equilibrium to another one, in between, kind of small differences can make a huge impact, whether a system is tipped in one direction or the other. So it's kind of that idea. And many of us feel perhaps that we are in such a moment, right? And therefore, even though it feels overwhelming, right? And how can what I think, what I do, be relevant for this larger situation? That is non-intuitive, right? Granted, right? But I like this because it's kind of the core principle of nonlinear systems thinking that everyone knows and that is important to remember. So systems thinking, so I don't want to, I think I already lost half of my time, so I want to jump over this. This is, so this is really awareness-based, a framework, right, that I would say is state-of-the-art systems thinking. It's something that we call awareness-based systems change, and it not only includes the symptoms at the top, kind of above the waterline, but also these deeper issues of structures and processes, of paradigms of thinking that are underneath these structures, and of the deeper sources, right, of our energy, of our creativity, of our sense of who we really are. And whenever you deal with real deep systems change, you're very, very likely to be involved in all of these layers, one way or another. And so while in change-making methodologies we have made a lot of progress on these first three levels, what has had my attention in particular more lately is this fourth one here, and that's kind of altogether what we call awareness-based systems change. So the three guiding principles here are you cannot, and it's like, I don't know, 20 words or so that summarize my past 20 years as an action researcher, right? 20 years and 20 words, that's sobering as well, but it's also true. It is summarizing the experience I have had in many of these cases. You cannot change a system unless you transform consciousness. That's number one. So you cannot change a system unless you transform the mindsets of the people who are enacting that system. And many of us, of course, have seen that. Number two, you cannot transform consciousness or mindsets if you're not making a system sense and see itself. So that's basically how change on the collective level happens, right? You need to make the system sense and see itself and realize, oh, these outcomes that no one wants actually have something to do with my own decision making as well, right? So, or with how we make decisions or how we make choices. And that, we of course know this principle from personal experience. It's just kind of in society. So I would say, if you really look at evolution, what is the role of civil society? A fair amount is that. But I'm going to talk about later how this role is actually shifting of civil society. But it's kind of, that's where all our work comes into play, because we point out, right, we create awareness, right, on certain externalities that have been in our blind spot that need to be attended to as we move forward, as we kind of redesign and evolve our economic and education, political and cultural activities. So that's number two. And I would say the important word here is, because making systems see itself, right, that's, sure, that has been the foundation of all systems thinking, right, for many decades, really. Nothing new there. What is the one new word? Sense. Making a system see and sense itself. Why is that important? Remember knowing doing gap, right? The knowledge doing gap. It's the heart, right? You have to touch the heart, and that has everything to do with our role in society, right? It's not like good enough just providing information about stuff that's broken. And so we need to create experiences that touch the heart, right? Because that is the mechanism, if you want, in a societal sense. And then, number 3, you can't lead systems transformation unless you sense and presence the future, right? What is presence? It's what I started with, right? Meeting the emerging future in the moment, right? You need to connect to the moment in a way that is where you sense what's possible, and you begin to embody that, all right? So that's, if you're not embodying what you want to see, well, already Gandhi told us, right? That's not, that will not get us far. So this is number 3, right? And it really has to do with so in civil society, so I'm like old school, I would say, right? Some people say, oh no, don't talk about leadership, it's all about change making and so on. So no, I'm old school, right? Because I like the word leadership, and what's actually broken today is leadership, right? We have, epic amount of leadership failure. Just look at up north, right? Everyone is hurting, right? So that is a massive amount of leadership failure. What is the essence of leadership? It is, if you go back to the Indo-European word root, and it's true for the English word and all the European, the Spanish, Portuguese, and all the other Indo-European languages, including Sanskrit. Leadership is this: stepping forth, stepping into the unknown, right? Stepping from one world you know very well, right, current reality, to another world that you don't know what it is, because it will only come into being if you take the courage to put your foot from the world that you know into the world that you don't, right? And that's, of course, that's a terrifying move, right? That's the first-person experience of leadership that we all have as individuals, that we collectively have as organizations sometimes, and certainly have now, right, as a planetary community, right, given the stuff that's coming at us, right, in this current moment. So, what was really, when I came to MIT, if you really want to boil it down to something really simple, what was my main insight? Something very simple. There are 2 sources of learning and leadership. One is the past, and the other one is what's emerging, the emerging future. When you look at how do we organize schools today, right? What is that whole institution, right? What are we dragging our children through? It's all based on methodologies that are based on this: reflecting on and capturing the experience of the past. And there are many benefits to that, but if our learning and our leadership is limited to that, and we are moving into an age of disruption where we face new situations, unprecedented situations, in which the experience of the past are sometimes not so very helpful, and sometimes are the very obstacle to come up with something new, well, that's a problem, right? That's a real limitation then. So what I started to do 25 years ago is to put myself, to investigate this question. What does it take to learn and lead from the emerging future? And what is the underlying methodological backbone, right? Kind of that allows you to activate that type of operating when it really matters. And what I learned, right? What does it take to learn and lead from the emerging future? And what I learned is this. It takes a journey. It takes a journey that is both an outer journey and an inner journey. And the outer journey is, gets you to the places of most potential and basically out of your own bubble, right? Kind of, and, connect with where the problem is more amplified or, parts of the emerging future are already visible or something like that. And then the inner journey, right, has to do with listening to others with your mind and heart wide open. So the first stage really of this process is, you could summarize with observe, 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 right? And really a deep immersion journey, right, into the situation that we are facing. The second stage has to do with deep sense making, right? Go to the inner place of stillness where knowing comes to surface, right? A deeper way of not only reflecting on what have we been learning over here, but also what actually is, what is it we are called for? Remember kind of when I said the future is a possibility that is looking at me because it depends on me to manifest. So really establishing, you cannot, when you are rushed, connect with that. So you need to really get to a place of stillness where you engage with that kind of resonance. And then, of course, when ideas come up, and they do come up, they always come up, you explore the future by doing. You move into rapid cycle prototyping. And that's what I described in the, that's kind of the U process that I described in the book published 20 years ago, the book Theory U. Today, I would summarize the same thing with just 3 words: attention, intention, and agency. Attention, if truly deepened, gives rise to intention. So remember, if you truly, and you may, I'm sure you have experience of that kind of, if you truly immerse yourself into a situation and you stay with that and you allow that situation to speak to you, not projecting kind of all your old stuff, but really open up, right, your channels of reception here and on the level of your whole being. Then so this attending to what's happening is beginning to speak to us in terms of what it is we are called for, right? That's kind of what I mean with intention, right? A sense of what it really is we are called for, right? What is depending on us to manifest. So what is mine to do? Kind of, so that is not just kind of wishful thinking, right? It is kind of a perceptive capacity. That's what I'm saying. That it's a level of knowing that's available for us that we can connect with. And then when we have established that connection, so intention, if truly clarified and crystallized, begins to activate agency. Begins to activate, so that means helping hands, partners show up, kind of little experiments, begins to activate individual and collective action that moves us into this direction. And of course, a lot of this work has to do with cultivating these three inner instruments of knowing, right? That is kind of the inner dimension of that. So this is, if you want, kind of the summary of Theory U. And what it really means is that it's highlighting an inner dimension of leadership, among others, that I have met with many practitioners. So here's one of them who shared with me that his many years of leading transformational change, this is his most important learning experience. The success of what I do as a leader depends on the inner condition of the intervener. The success of an intervention depends on the interior condition of the intervener. So the success of what I do as a leader depends on the inner place from that I operate. And when I heard that, I realized, wow, kind of here is not just talking about what I do as a change maker, not only about the process that I have to use, but he's talking about something else, right? Kind of that's less visible, and that has to do with the inner place, kind of from that I operate. And that really put me on that track to investigate these interior conditions. And today, I would describe these, this inner territory in terms of these three capacity: open mind, open heart, open will. Okay, so that's the Theory U bit, if you want. But then, as we all know, what has been really happening as of late, let's say the last decade, is pretty much the exact opposite, right? Also, right? Yes, we see a lot of this now embodied in our experience, but we also see a lot of this amplified around us. In other words, not just opening mind, heart, will, but a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, and will, aka amplification of ignorance, hate, anger, and fear. We all know I don't need to go into detail, but let's just kind of, looking at the neighbors is always a little more easy, kind of. Okay, denial, climate denial industry, right? You all know that history. So, I mean, the denial is nowhere on earth more visible than in the current way the country is run, right? Desensing. So, applying the chainsaw by the richest man on earth against the little contributions to the most vulnerable people. That's the desensing, right? So it's completely disconnected to what's really happening on the ground. Now, absensing, right? So what that leads to is a state of delusion. That's what you see playing out. Because, and you see it playing out, and the loss, the wiping out of $10 trillion of equity the past few days. That's real data. It means there's a delusion happening, and the delusion is sitting in Washington. And it's not just Trump, it was also kind of the previous administration, and it is a delusion of your own power. So, in this case, that we still live, that's the delusion, in a monocentric world, where the United States is at the center, and everything else is just, in different layers around it and below it. And the reason why this is not going to work, why the markets don't believe that this is going to work, and the reason why the boycott against Russia and so on is not going to work is all the same. It's the lack of realization that we already live in a multipolar world that already has shifted and that no longer can be dictated around by just one place. But that message hasn't quite landed. And that is kind of when you really think, so how does this really happen, or how does that make sense? It's a delusion, right? And that is guiding the policies. Always blaming others, right? There's always somebody, the previous administration, or of course foreigners, immigrants, and so on, leading to destruction. Well, I mentioned equity destruction, but there's many, many more destructions. Needless to point out. And at the end of the cycle, of course, is self-destruction, right? So that's the cycle of collapse that's unfolding, that we are part of, and that's the leadership challenge. So what I'm saying essentially is, if we face disruption, and disruption, of course, is going to stay, we as change makers have a choice. We can respond to a situation by closing down and turning away, right? Turning backwards, making ... great again, right? Again is the operative word. Or we can turn toward and open up. Turning away and closing down activates one cycle that by now we all know very well, while turning toward and opening up with all the different layers opens up another cycle and dynamic that we also know very well, right, from our various experiences. So one is based on, you could say, if you zoom out a little bit, architectures of separation, right? The worlds go up. And the other one is really built on or based on architectures of connection, right? Kind of where we try to connect across these boundaries, make them more fluid. But again, what is the independent variable based on which either this, when a disruption hits, we activate this cycle or this cycle? And I would say the independent variable is you, it's us. It's in how we respond. It's the inner place from that we respond to the situation. That is, can be grounded in ecosystem awareness or can be grounded in ecosystem awareness. Ecosystem awareness is an awareness that is originating from inside its own boundaries, right? So it's kind of inside the boundaries of your system, right? When you're basically stuck in your own bubble, right? Kind of that, and makes sense from within that, right? That is ecosystem awareness. While ecosystem awareness is an awareness that is originating from beyond the boundaries of my system. How? By accessing curiosity, accessing empathy, right? Putting yourself in other people's shoes, and by the capacity to let go. Let go of our maybe beliefs or ideas that have been serving us in the past, perhaps, but no longer. All right. So civil society today is dealing with both of these realities. And of course we know where all the resources are, right? So we need, just focusing on this one is not good enough. We need to upgrade our capacity to engage this in a way that is grounded in these principles. And what are the gateways into that, right? We need to move beyond polarization. And what are the gateways into that? And they have to do with three, I would say, leverage points that are related to three things overrated and three things underrated. The first thing overrated, of course, is knowledge. I already talked about that, knowing, doing gap. What is underrated here? Not knowing. Our capacity to sense into, what is about to happen. But we don't know as of yet. It's the capacity of listening and the capacity of sensing. The second thing, overrated comfort, underrated discomfort, right? Leaning into difficult situations, emotionally challenging situations without getting derailed. So I think that's a core capacity, talking to people with whom, we learn to organize around ideology, right? People that agree with us on pretty much everything, right? That doesn't get us anywhere. We need to learn to organize with people with whom we profoundly disagree. That's the key. Any kind of comments, right? Any kind of, and that's where the comments are our friend. Because I may disagree with my neighbor or another person, about a lot of political things, perhaps, ideological things, right? But we both want a good school. We both want clean water. We both want good food, for our community, and so forth. The third one is perhaps the most disturbing here: overrated action. What can be possibly wrong with action? Well, if a challenge hits and we immediately jump into action, we often tend to reenact the same old patterns, right? So we move into a reactive mode. And the underrated capacity here is non-action, aka stillness. The capacity to pause. It's kind of the, remember the bottom of the U, the deep sense making, and really connecting with what is calling on us, right, to do in this situation right now. So essentially, stillness, equanimity, right, emotional resilience, to lean into difficult situations without getting derailed, and humility, right? So those are I would say, important inner conditions that we need to support, where we need to support each other, where we need to support ourselves. And because that gives us the strength and the capacity to really engage with these difficult situations that we are in. So I want to end with coming back to the farm, because the iceberg model and the different layers and all of that, it has been used, it has been very useful, and I just demonstrated how it can be used. But it also has been around for 100 years in complexity theory and systems thinking. And I always thought, well, perhaps it's about time, to come up with something new, particularly in the face of the polycrisis. What could that be, with a new metaphor? And for me, the main source of inspiration is the farm that I grew up on, that I already mentioned, right? And what I learned from my father and my parents essentially is this: that the quality of what's growing above the ground is a function of the quality of the soil. And today I'm living in Boston, thousands of miles away from the farm, and apparently doing something very different than farming. But when I think about it, it's all the same. And I would say you are doing the same thing as well, perhaps, right? Which is, we are also dealing with fields, right? But it's not the field of agriculture, it is the social field, right? And what are the two main components of the social field? It is the social systems, right? The visible stuff. Usually when the term systems is used, it's a third-person perspective. You talk about the tangible stuff. But then there is also the social soil. And the social soil is basically what we talked about before. It's the quality of our awareness and the quality of our relationships. By which I mean our qualities of thinking together, conversing together, and acting together. And when you apply that distinction to current reality, what do we see? Well, on the upper half, right, we see all the different societal sectors that we all are dealing with, and then on the lower half, we have basically all the social soil, the relational dimension. And another word for that, of course, is it's the operating system, right? Because and what we really need in society is we need to upgrade the operating system, right? Not just a new app. Once in a while, we need to upgrade the operating system. And I think that's what we have seen lately happening in all these different sectors by going through these changes from outcome and efficiency centric, something I call 2.0, to user and multi-stakeholder centric, right? You bring in all these different perspectives and you reorganize around the user experience and stuff like that, something I call 3.0, to ecosystem and regeneration centric, right? Kind of we are not just a few, but really all the stakeholders come in, including the voices of future generation, the voices of non-human species, and so on and so forth. So in agriculture, I already talked about from industrial to sustainable to regenerative, food as medium for healing planet and people, and education for teaching for testing, right? 2.0 is just kind of what you can measure, the outcomes. The absence of good education. What is a good school? Learner-centric, right? You organize around learning journeys. What's the future of learning? Not that. The future is education for human flourishing. We are just starting a big, or in the process of a big project, Education Human Flourishing, with the high-performing country group in the OECD, kind of, and the realization is, in the face of AI, we need to completely reimagine what education is, because there's no point in the face of AI to educate second-rate robots. We need to educate first-rate humans. And so that's kind of education for human flourishing. In health, basically, foundation here, evidence-based health. We then, past 20 years, reorganized healthcare delivery systems around patient journeys. And now, really, the focus is shifting to strengthening the sources of human and planetary health. Not just combating symptoms of sickness, but strengthening the true sources of health, which of course has everything to do with what we eat and with all the other sectors, right? So needless to say. In business, right, sustainability in business, from efficiency to ESG to shifting the purpose of business, right? Business as a force for good. And it's interesting because many of us, because it's difficult to get funding, right? We build mission-driven enterprises, social enterprises. It's kind of moving into that same space as well. Finance, we know what's broken with finance. Too much money here, the extractive economy. Too little here, the regenerative economy, regenerating our commons, right? So that's the bigger topic. In technology, really the use of AI, not just as a tool for the empire building for a few men, but using AI as a tool for the well-being of all, right? Kind of that is the challenge. That's kind of a whole other conversation. And at the end of the day, I would say everything comes down to one thing: governance. Including AI, right? Because who is making the choices? Whether, for now in AI, we move to autonomous, to AI agents, right? That's now the shift. Are we going to build autonomous AI agents which basically will cement and amplify all inequalities we have for decades to come? Or are we building advisory AI agents that actually enhance the human quality of sense-making and decision-making and creativity? So who is making these decisions? It's all coming down to this one, and that is where civil society comes into play. What is 2.0? It's markets and hierarchies, right? Kind of it's all the traditional stuff we learn in schools, right? So that's the foundation. 3.0, what have we been doing the past decades? We have all doing the same thing, right? Building multilateral institutions, all of us deal with multi-stakeholder system one way or another. Any kind of institutional leader today kind of needs to manage this, kind of all change makers deal with that. So this is what we have been dealing with now. And 4.0 would be basically upgrading the quality of this by organizing around shared intention. Really building shared intention, increasing, for example, pre-market areas of collaboration, right, on an industry level, on the whole system level. That is realigning the actual results that we collectively create with our intentionality, right, that most people really share. So, what I'm basically saying is that the evolution of our sectors and systems can be seen as a manifestation of an evolving human consciousness that moves from ego to eco, from silo and, ecosystem awareness to a user and stakeholder, multi-stakeholder awareness, and from there to a regeneration and ecosystem awareness. And as we are on this trajectory in all the different systems we are working in, and you can see them as different levels of participation of civil society, right? That's really what's the common language behind. As we are in this movement, we come across all the same challenges. How to move from extraction to regeneration in terms of our business models, right? How to move from the mindset from ego to eco, so from a silo to a whole systems awareness, and how to move our ways of operating, our patterns of action from just reacting to the past to sensing and realizing emerging future possibility. Dealing with systems today, this is what you often hear, right? Kind of when you work with institutional leaders and so on. That's what many people say. We face 4.0 challenges, and the institutional response mechanisms that we are applying as a society, as a community, are really based on 2.0 mechanisms and toolkits. We've been working with 30 UN country teams lately, and this is these 2 points is what many of them said, reflecting on the larger situation. We're encouraged to shoot for the moon, right? Doing big, great things. But the equipment we got, right, is just a donkey cart, right? Looks like a donkey cart. So there's a profound mismatch between the challenges we face in our real life and the equipment in terms of management tools, in terms of frameworks, but also in terms of institutional designs. Think about all the silos and stuff, right, that we have. And you can say, okay, but why is it, right? Why is it today that everyone talks about 4.0 in here, right? That's the talk of the day, right? Yet, where is all the money? Where's still in 2.0, right? Now, even though we have made progress in direction in 3.0, right? In many so that's, so I think and we have examples here, but it's not the mainstream that is here. So why is the journey towards 4.0 the road less traveled? Why is that so difficult? And I would say because we are looking at all this the wrong way, which is just from the viewpoint of above the ground. And what we are missing is the social soil. That to really make that progress, we have to, upgrade our methods and tools, how we go about that, to shifting the quality of relationships, right? That will get us there in all these different multi-stakeholder situations and so forth. And that's essentially, something that's spelled out in an earlier version in Theory U, and an updated version in a book with the title Presence that will be coming out in a couple of weeks. But it's essentially kind of 7 practices, right? Kind of just as the farmer is needed. So when you're a farmer, you need tools to cultivate the land, right? Kind of the chisel, plow, whatever that is. And we as change makers need the same thing. We need practices, right? To actually make this happen. The cultivation of the social soil. Self-awareness, deep listening, right? Kind of generative listening. Dialogue, the capacity to shift a conversation from a debate to a dialogue, aka thinking together, right? Deep sensing, kind of this presencing, it's like connecting to the future that is looking at us, right? So we talked about that. Co-imagining the future, exploring the future by doing co-creation, and the governance piece. So that's one story, I would say, that is one evolutionary trajectory, kind of that, of course, we all are familiar with. But what I find interesting is really the zone of convergence here, and that to do this, right, we need to upgrade this stuff here, right, our tools and capacities in terms of the social soil. But there's the other story that I already mentioned, right? We live in the AI moment. No one knows what's going to happen, but we have some data, right? Through our first encounter with AI in the forms of social media. And what we saw is what you all know, kind of these 3 unintended side effects: mass disinformation, mass polarization, and mass depression, leading to a backsliding of democracy, right? The phenomenon of kakistocracy, also known as the rule of the worst, right? The rule of the least qualified. Needless to say, just look up north. Fragmentation and violence instead of really co-creation. Dystopian views of the future in terms of really co-imagining a future that we want to create. We have seen hyper-inequality, right? That's the story of the past 45 years, plus worldwide, but it's even more amplified through the past few years. Hyper-extraction, just look at what has happened the past few years in the fossil fuel industry, fracking, and so on and so forth. Opioidization in health, addictive patterns, weaponizing of education towards basically manipulation and rewriting history. And all of that, right, so all the environmental issues really boil down to the fragmentation of the soil, right? That's kind of the number one indicator really for the health of an ecosystem. And what is the functional equivalent on the social side? It's the social soil, right? And what we see is the fragmentation of the social soil. So it's in the form of ever-shortening attention spans and so on and so forth, right? So, and that, of course, is the result of the attention fracking industry. Who sat in the front row of in January 20th at the inauguration? the owners of the attention fracking industry, whose power is rested on a contract that we never did, which is that they own our data and have the capability to turn it against us and to build a $1 trillion empire on it. That contract was never made. It happened in a societal blind spot. And that's, of course, one of the leverage points we as civil society need to point out and need to kind of bring to collective attention, because the moment it is part of the collective attention, it will shift. It only went through because no one was paying attention to it. And that relates to, rather than deep listening, echo chambers, silencing, right, left and right, cancel cultures, and so on and so forth. So the question here is, all right, so that's the stuff we have been discussing in the last years. Nothing new, but here's the question. Are these really 11 different problems, or is it 11 different faces of one and the same problem? And if so, what is its name? I don't have a good name, so maybe some of you have, but I have a working title. Matrix of Absencing. So it's essentially, yes, it's a way of acting, right? It's a way of organizing how all the stuff works, but not all of us, who we really are, is present in that, right? So we are basically freezing human evolution in its current, if not recent state. And we are, in my view of the human being is, we are only half here, right? There's one part of us that's already manifest, and then there's this deeper capacity that we can sense with and begin to, we've been always evolving, right? So the problem with the absencing is it's freezing us into a current state of operating and disconnecting us from our highest future potential. So those are the two stories. I think that's kind of basically the situation, right? This is one evolutionary trajectory available to us. Of course, kind of what's bringing us into this room, this is another trajectory, which is also very powerful, and it's also very influential and present in the current moment, right? And what I'm saying is not like anti-AI or anti-technology. What I'm talking about is what is the underlying intention based on which we design, disseminate, and use AI and technology. And that intention, if clarified, would make all the difference. So what I basically try to share with you is that the future of systems leadership, is basically around something very simple, right? To extend our attention from social systems to social soil. And by doing this, that kind of these 7 practices are one of the main leverage points. And that our work as civil society is really creating these islands of coherence, these islands of 4.0 coherence, which in many ways is the most under-leveled, under-supported and under-leveraged areas, particularly when it comes to these, what I also try to say is to move forward towards 4.0 from any of these sectors requires attention to the social soil. And the more we move forward towards 4.0, the more they will converge in this zone of convergence here. And the role of civil society is absolutely critical in evolving our governance system. So I want to end with that, right? I want to end with talking about civil society here. So what are the modes that I am noticing? This, of course, 2.0. So what is civil society 2.0? It is advocacy, right? Very important, absolutely critical, calling out what needs to be called out and what needs to be named in public. But of course, it's also a little bit kind of this kind of gesture, right? And so let me, so it is a little bit kind of this, this gesture of pointing to others, right? What needs to be called out. What is civil society 3.0? I would say it has to do with cross-sector, right? So you're not just naming what's broken, but you're reaching out, right, to the businesses, to governments, kind of you help them to figure out how what they mess up constantly, kind of how that can be evolving, how these issues can be solved, can be mitigated, can be addressed, right, in a more effective way. So multi-stakeholder and multilateral processes, one way or another. And many of us are engaged in that as well. What then is 4.0? And I would say 4.0 moves us into this place more upstream, right? So the advocacy is way downstream, right? When everything is already too late, right? That was where I started also as a civil society activist. The multi-stakeholder stuff gets you more upstream, right? Because you get a seat in the conversation around the table, how we address these issues, so they no longer occur in real time. But the co-creation stuff is even more upstream because you not only respond to what's broken, but you can co-imagine and co-create a future that is more living up to our highest aspiration, that's kind of more manifesting of what we all feel is possible, but will not happen without us. So that's kind of the co-creation part. And of course, as we move along this trajectory, and I'm not saying that this is no longer necessary, right? I'm saying we need the whole range. As we move across this trajectory, we need to upgrade our capacity, right, to dialogue, right, to bring people with very different interests together, not just your view and my view and the same old thing, but really move into this process of thinking together. And the same with the levels of listening. So I want to end before turning it over with doing a little demo kind of the 4 levels of listening, and then you will have a possibility to practice that. So I will do 2. So I want to, because I want to make visible this kind of inner shift that we all need to cultivate one way or another. So the 4 levels of listening. Here is kind of how you can, one way to visualize them. So 1.0 is essentially a listening kind of where I'm just downloading what I already know. 2.0 is factual, right? Subject-object awareness. I'm here, you are there, and I'm attending to that. 3.0 is empathic, right? Kind of putting yourself into some other stakeholders, so it's kind of your cognition moves from here, only here, to also here. And then 4.0 is really kind of connecting with what's about to emerge, right? So what's not quite there yet, and hold the space for that. So let me give you a little demo, and then Laura will move us into a little exercise. So 1.0. So I am I see you, but what I really see is, I'm in front of you, but what I really see is what I know of you, right? Not actually, but so all my experience of the past, right? What I remember from you, for example. 2.0, so factual listening. And that's, so, you know, you could say it's something like that. So I'm following, I'm actually really engaging with what's happening now. And so I am investigating real data, right? I'm following probably my framework, my question. And so I really attend to the situation and real data in front of me. I'm not just projecting stuff, right? I really engage with what I see. But there is this, I'm here, you are there, there is this separation, it's very clear. I could also so it's like my telescope, right, that I use to look at certain data points. Some people may say it's a little narrow, right? I would say, no, it's not narrow, it's focused, right? I focus on my question. I gather the data based on the question I was setting out to investigate. And now I will slowly shift to 3.0, right, empathic listening. Okay, you see that? So there's, and you already notice how our relationship has shifted, right? So I shifted from 2.0 to 3.0, but your experience of the situation also shifted. And you see how my attention is yes, I'm still watching you, but it's also I'm also sensing a little bit into, okay, who we are and this moment and so on. And so now, for reasons of visibility, I will step up here. But so I want to now slowly move from 3.0 to 4.0. I'll try that a little bit, right? And remember, so 3.0 is putting yourself into some other perspective, some other shoes, and 4.0 is this deeper level, one way or another, okay? So, So you saw me a little bit wandering around. I was trying to attend more to the edges, noticing the fresh air that's coming from outside, some of the noises, noticing the light from the other side. I try to connect to the moment, and you just stay with that, right? So it's what's emerging from the moment, I don't know, so I stay with it, and I try to attend to the larger space that gives rise to us being together here, right? More here, more there, more upwards, but also more from what's arising from the ground. And I shifted my position. I'm no longer looking down on you. You're sitting, I'm standing. That's a very old pattern. And I'm putting myself on same level or even closer to the ground. Okay? So that's, I just try to express with my gesture an inner shift that is required of us if we want to hold the space for a conversation to shift from the back and forth to these deeper levels of collective intelligence that we all have, but often not fully activate because these interior conditions are a critical enabler for that.
Gracias, Otto. Entonces, soy Laura Pastorini, soy el puente de Presence Institute para Latinoamérica, me toca liderar un equipo maravilloso de personas que hacen posible que estas metodologías lleguen en nuestro idioma, a nuestra tierra y a nuestra cultura, pero también se retroalimenten de toda la sabiduría, el poder, las trayectorias y experiencias tan potentes y tan ricas de nuestro continente. Entonces, la idea ahora que vieron que Otto decía esto todo el lado izquierdo de la U, que tiene que ver con las antenas, escuchar, observar, incorporar información, ¿sí? Antenas afuera, antenas adentro. Y antes de pasar a la acción, que vamos a no quedarnos solamente sentadas, sentados, sentadas, sino que vamos a hacer práctica, vamos a dar un momento de pausa, eso que estaba en la panza de la U, esa presencia, que es un poco el diferencial de esta metodología. En vez de pasar de problema, solución, acción, reacción, nos damos ese tiempito de aterrizar, respirar, dejar ir todo lo que escuchamos y sentimos y dejar venir lo que quiere emerger. Entonces, para eso usamos una práctica que se llama journaling, y este journaling lo que hace es una práctica que a veces llamamos la práctica corporal también, o sea, dejamos que la mano escriba y ahí nos deja sorprender un poquito por la cabeza, ¿no? La cabeza se deja sorprender por lo que escribe la mano y nos damos un tiempito como de asentar, de pasar por el tamiz, por el filtro, que es lo que quedó. Entonces, les invitamos a tomar sus cuadernos. No sé si hay alguien que no tiene hojita, si hay alguna hojita por ahí. ¿Hay alguien que no tiene hojita? ¿Tenemos hojita, caneta? Si no, le pedimos a la vecina o al vecino, me parece mejor. Bien. Siempre tenemos en la inteligencia colectiva activada, siempre hay masa crítica de papeles y lapiceras. Y en esta colaboración, estos liderazgos colaborativos que promovemos también, ¿sí? Entonces, vamos a hacer esto, que son 5 minutos, y después nos vamos a mover, ¿sí? Pero les invitamos que si quieren aprender la teoría U, que se aprende haciendo, nos tomamos estos 5 minutitos y luego ya los vamos a ir a conversar, pero de una manera especial. Nos vamos a ir a pasear de una manera especial, que les vamos a sugerir. ¿Estamos ahí? ¿Sí? Bien. La primera pregunta es, ¿qué me queda resonando de todo lo que escuché, vi? Y no es tratar de, no es una anamnesis, no trato de rescatar conceptos, sino ¿qué es el eco que me queda? Una palabra, una imagen, un insight que tuve. Lo primero que me venga, ¿qué me queda resonando? Una sensación que tuve en algún momento que me sorprendió. ¿Y qué preguntas me quedan? Anotamos 2 o 3 preguntas emergentes, no la pregunta metodológica del concepto 4.0, si eso viniera así como algo emergente también, pero tratamos de que la pregunta también como propia, que emerge de ahí. 1, 2, 3 preguntas. La siguiente pregunta es, de esto que resuena conmigo, de estas preguntas que emergen, ¿qué es lo que toca mi vida y mi trabajo hoy? ¿Cómo se relaciona eso que resuena, estas preguntas, con mi vida y mi trabajo hoy? ¿Cómo aterriza todo esto que estoy viendo, observando, sintiendo con mi vida, mi trabajo hoy? ¿Cuál es esa conexión? Que digo, ajá, esto sí, acá lo veo, allá lo veo. Y si ahora me imagino que miro este momento actual de mi vida y mi trabajo, pero desde la perspectiva de un pájaro, un quetzal volando ahí encima de mi momento, como si hiciera un zoom out. ¿Qué es lo que estoy tratando de hacer en este momento de mi vida? De transformar, de lograr, de alcanzar. No lo que yo ya sé siempre que le cuento a la gente que estoy haciendo, sino mirando ahora desde este nuevo lugar interno que estoy ahora. ¿Qué estoy tratando de hacer, de lograr, de transformar en mi vida, mi trabajo en este momento? Y dejo que la mano escriba y me sorprenda. Y la última pregunta es, estuve mirando recién mi momento actual, lo que es importante para mí, y ahora desde arriba, y ahora como si esa mirada de pájaro mirara un poquito hacia atrás. ¿Cuál fue un momento de mi vida que fue clave? Puede haber sido un momento de quiebre, por ejemplo, un momento de transformación profunda, que me hizo ser quien soy hoy. Esta persona que está aquí sentada escribiendo. Si ese pájaro mira un poquito el recorrido de mi vida, hoy estamos en un momento de quiebre y disrupción, decía Otto, de esos hemos vivido muchos en la vida. ¿Cuáles fueron momentos clave de quiebre, de transformación en mi vida hasta ahora? Uno o dos, como es para nosotros, podemos poner palabras claves ahí. ¿Y cuáles fueron esos recursos que activé en ese momento? Ese es el final de esta pregunta. Nos dejamos incorporar lo vivido, lo escuchado, lo visto, lo que ahora surgió como resonancia. Lo dejamos aterrizar en nosotros, nosotras, nosotres, en lo que vamos terminando. Y vamos ahora a darnos vuelta con alguien que no conozca, que esté al lado, y vamos a formar parejas. Idealmente alguien que no conozca. ¿Estamos más o menos? Alguien que quedó soltera, soltero, soltere. ¿Estamos ahí? ¿Estamos? Todavía no se levanten. Vamos, les voy a dar una instrucción para poder ir a digerir en compañía. ¿Sí? Entonces, la invitación es a tomarse este break autogestionado. Afuera hay cafecito, cosas ricas, hay un precioso patio para caminar. Lo único, ¿hay alguien sin pareja acá? ¿Quién está sin pareja? Levante la mano. Uy, hay cantidad. Hay 4 sin pareja, 6 sin pareja. Mírense, obsérvense, son justitos. Bien. Entonces, vamos a hacer un break en parejas. ¿Estamos acá? Igual ahora encuentras. Entonces, lo voy a hacer verbal. Exacto. Entonces, vamos a invitarles a hacer este break ahora. Entonces, la invitación es a compartir, sobre todo esta última pregunta, ¿no? Estos momentos de quiebre, disrupción y esos recursos que se activaron también en nosotros en esos momentos de quiebre, ¿sí? Por supuesto, nos presentamos brevemente, no currículum, sino soy fulanita, vivo por acá, ¿sí? Y lo importante de esto es que vamos a practicar la escucha que Otto nos platicaba recién, nos demostraba recién, ¿sí? Y es prestar atención a mi atención. Uy, ahora estaba reído, no me acuerdo lo que me dijo. O ahora estaba re 1.0 diciendo, ay, qué horrible lo que me dice. O sí, estoy de acuerdo contigo. Pero lo hacemos todo en silencio. O sea, es 10 minutos, una persona habla y la otra escucha radicalmente, escucha radical, ¿sí? Sin interrumpir. Cambiamos 10 minutos, la persona que escuchaba habla, la que hablaba escucha radical 10 minutos y de regreso a la sala podemos, si queremos compartir algo de la experiencia entre los dos. Vamos a regresar 11:30. Si alguien va a abandonar a su pareja, se lo dice ahora, porque si no después sufre. ¿Sí? Por favor. 11:30 volvemos. 11:45 volvemos. 11:45. ¿Sí? Tenemos media horita más o menos. Nos encontramos aquí 11:45 de regreso y les pedimos que liberen la sala y se lleven sus cosas. Pueden caminar, hay una sala arriba donde pueden conversar, sentarse, está el patio, ¿sí?